Villagers mocked her for marrying a poor beggar, unaware he is a secret billionaire. The whole village was already laughing at her before she even said yes. Not because she was a thief. Not because she was stubborn. Not because she did anything wrong. They were laughing because the man who loved her had no shoes, no house, no family name, and carried his life inside a dirty sack. But what none of them knew, what even she did not yet know, was that this single decision would change the destiny of the entire village forever. And it all began with a girl who grew up with nothing but kindness. Amaka was 25 years old, and life had never been kind to her. Her story did not start with celebration. It started with rejection. Her mother, Judith, was chased out of her father's house many years ago when she became pregnant out of wedlock. The old man, her grandfather, said she had brought shame on the family. He did not care about tears. He did not care about apology. He did not care about the unborn child. He only cared about what the village would say. So Judith left with only the clothes on her body and the baby in her womb. She walked for days until she reached a neighboring village where no one knew her story. There, on the edge of the village, stood an old abandoned hut. The roof leaked. The walls were cracked. But it was shelter. That hut became their home. That was where Amaka was born. No ceremony. No visitors. No father's family. Only a young mother, crying in pain, holding her baby and whispering, "God, please help me raise her better than my life." They had no land. No farm. No relatives. No support. From the time Amaka could walk, she worked. She followed her mother to people's farms. They weeded. They harvested. They carried loads heavier than their bodies. When there was no farm work, Amaka fetched water for families. When there was no water job, she gathered firewood and sold it. Sometimes they ate only once in a day. Sometimes they slept hungry. Sometimes rain entered the hut and soaked their clothes. Yet Judith never allowed bitterness to live inside their house. Every night she told her daughter, "Amaka, no matter how poor you are, always appreciate small kindness. People's hearts are more important than their pockets." And Amaka listened. She grew into a beautiful young woman. Not just in face, but in heart. The villagers noticed. Some used her as an example to their own children. "Look at Amaka," they would say. "She is poor, but she is respectful. She works harder than rich people's children. She never insults anyone." But deep inside, some still saw her as the girl from the abandoned hut. The child of the woman that brought shame. Amaka never complained. She just worked. One evening, after fetching water from the stream, she met a stranger on the path. His clothes were torn. His feet were bare. He was sitting under a tree, holding a sack. "Sister," the man said softly, "please, can I drink water?" Amaka did not hesitate. She placed her clay pot on the ground and gave him the cup. The man drank like someone who had been thirsty for days. "Thank you," he said. "May God reward you." She smiled and walked away. The next day she saw him again, sitting at the village square under the big iroko tree. When he saw her, he stood up. "Sister," he called, "please can I have water again?" Her keg was empty. She had used the last of it at home. She looked at him and said, "Wait here. I will fetch water and come back." He thought she was joking. She was not. Amaka walked all the way back to the stream, filled her pot, and returned. The man was still there. He was shocked. "You came back?" he asked. She nodded. "I promised." He stared at her like he had never seen such a thing before. "Thank you," he said slowly. "I will return this kindness one day." From that day, they started talking. His name was Daniel. He said he had no home, no family, no work. He moved from place to place begging. Amaka invited him to their hut. When they had little food, she cut her own portion and gave him. Judith never complained. Instead she said, "Give him more." The villagers started talking. "Why is that girl always with that beggar? Does she not know her level? Is poverty not enough for them already?" Daniel began helping on farms. He worked hard. He never begged again. One evening he told Judith, "I want to marry your daughter." Judith was shocked. "But you are poor," she said. Daniel looked at her straight in the eyes. I will work hard. Your daughter will never sleep hungry. I promise. Judith turned to Amaka. What do you say? Amaka's voice was calm. I like him. He is a good man. That was how the beggar married Amaka. The whole village laughed. They said, poverty is in their blood. They said, who marries a beggar? They did not know the beggar was a secret billionaire. And this was only the beginning. The morning Amaka was to be married, the entire village woke up ready to laugh. Not to celebrate. Not to support. But to watch a poor girl make what they believed was the biggest mistake of her life. Word had spread like harmattan fire. Amaka is marrying that beggar. Some women stood at their doorways shaking their heads. Some men gathered under the Irako tree, already smiling before the sun even rose. Have you seen her future husband? One man asked, laughing. The one that sleeps with his life inside a sack? Yes. That one, another replied, slapping his thigh. Poverty has truly finished that family. Amaka heard all of it as she walked to the stream that morning. Her steps were slow. Her heart was heavy, but her back was straight. She did not cry. She did not argue. She simply carried her water. Inside the small hut, Judith was preparing the little they had for the wedding. There was no cow, no goat, no musicians. Only 2 pots of food and some palm wine borrowed from a neighbor who pitied them. Judith looked at her daughter and said softly, "Are you afraid?" Amaka shook her head. "No, Mama. I am sure of him." Judith sighed. "Then that is enough." Daniel arrived with clean but old clothes. He had borrowed sandals from a farmer he worked for. His sack was still beside him, tied with rope. The village gathered around them. People whispered. Children pointed. Some laughed openly. One woman said loudly, "Is this the groom? This is what Amaka carried all her life for." Another replied, "Leave them. Poverty must marry poverty." The local elder who agreed to bless the marriage cleared his throat and spoke. "Daniel, do you promise to care for Amaka?" Daniel answered without fear. "I do." "Amaka, do you accept him?" She nodded. "Yes." There was silence for a moment. Then laughter. "Let us see how long this will last," a man shouted. "By next year she will return to her mother's hut." Amaka held Daniel's hand. He squeezed back gently. They returned to the hut as husband and wife. No celebration. No song. Only hope. That night, as rain fell through the broken roof, Daniel whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Amaka smiled. "Thank you for loving me." Neither of them knew that this simple hut, mocked by everyone, would soon become the starting point of a miracle the whole village would never forget. The first morning Amaka woke up as a married woman. The sky was already bright, but their room was still dark. The rain from the night before had soaked part of the hut. One corner of the floor was wet. The smell of damp earth filled the small space. Amaka sat up slowly and looked around. Nothing had changed. No new bed. No new clothes. No new pots. Only a new name in her heart, wife. She turned and saw Daniel sleeping beside her on the thin mat. His face was calm. No worry. No fear. Just deep rest, like a man who had placed his life in God's hands. She smiled. Quietly, she stood up, tied her wrapper, and went outside. The village was already alive. Women were heading to the stream. Men were preparing to go to their farms. The same people who laughed at her yesterday were now looking at her with curiosity. One woman whispered to another, "So this is the morning after the beggar's wedding." Amaka ignored them. She went to the stream, fetched water, returned, swept the hut, cleaned the wet floor, and began preparing breakfast, the little they had left, 2 cups of gari and groundnuts. When Daniel woke up, he found her sitting quietly waiting for him. "Good morning, my wife," he said with a shy smile. She smiled back. "Good morning, my husband." They ate in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because every word felt too precious. After breakfast, Daniel stood up and said, "I will go look for work." Amaka nodded. "I will go with Mama to the farms." They walked out together. Some villagers laughed again. "Look at the new couple going to labor," someone said. Instead of honeymoon, they are going to weed cassava. Daniel did not reply. They separated at the farm path. He went one way, Amaka and Judith went the other. That day was long. The sun was hot. The ground was hard. Their hands were blistered. At evening, Daniel returned with a small loaf of bread and a few coins. Amaka looked at him in surprise. "You found work." He nodded. "A trader in the next village allowed me to help him carry bags. He paid me." That night, they shared the bread and smiled like they had eaten a feast. Days passed. Weeks followed. Life remained hard. They worked every day. Sometimes they ate twice. Sometimes only once. Sometimes not at all. Yet something strange happened. Their hut was always full of laughter. Even Judith noticed it. One evening she said to Amaka, "I suffered for years, but I have never seen this kind of peace before." Amaka replied, "Love makes suffering lighter." Daniel continued going to the next village for work. Sometimes he returned late. Sometimes with little money. Sometimes with none. But he never complained. One afternoon, while Amaka was returning from the stream, she overheard some women talking. "That Daniel is useless," one said. "He should not have married. He cannot even feed his wife properly." "Amaka made a mistake," another replied. "Now she will suffer more than before." Amaka walked past them quietly. That night, when Daniel returned empty-handed, he sat outside the hut with his head down. Amaka sat beside him. "Is everything okay?" she asked. He looked at her. His eyes were heavy, but calm. "Yes," he said. "Just a hard day." She placed her head on his shoulder. "We will be fine." He closed his eyes. But inside Daniel's chest was a storm. Because Daniel was not a beggar. And this suffering was not what the world thought it was. That same night, when everyone was asleep, Daniel quietly walked into the bush behind the hut. He removed something from his sack and looked at it under the moonlight. It was a phone. Not an ordinary phone. It was sleek, expensive, shining even in the dark. He typed a message and sent it. Then he placed the phone back into the sack and returned to sleep beside his wife. And no one saw. The next weeks became even harder. The trader Daniel worked for left the village. Farm jobs reduced. Hunger visited often. One morning, Judith became weak and fell ill. Amaka panicked. They had no money for medicine. She cried that night. Daniel held her. "I will fix this," he whispered. The next day, he disappeared. He did not go to the next village. He did not return by evening. He did not come back at night. Amaka's heart nearly stopped. She waited. She cried. She walked around the village calling his name. Some villagers shook their heads. "You see," they said. "He has run away." That is what beggars do. Amaka refused to believe it. She sat outside their hut all night. At dawn, Daniel returned. His clothes were dusty. His face was tired. But in his hand was a bag of food, medicine, and money. Amaka burst into tears. "Where did you go?" she asked. He smiled. "To look for help." She hugged him like she would never let go. That night, Judith took her medicine. They ate properly for the first time in many days. Amaka slept in peace. But the villagers began to whisper again. Where did he get money? Something is strange about that man. They were right. Because Daniel's life was about to turn upside down. And so was the village's. The village of Umuoma had many secrets, but none of them could compare to the secret Daniel was carrying inside that old sack. After the night Daniel returned with food, medicine, and money, something changed. The air around the small hut felt different, heavier, quieter, like something unseen was moving closer. Judith's health slowly improved. She could now sit outside again, watching the road. Amaka continued working on farms, but her mind was no longer fully on the soil beneath her feet. The questions inside her heart were growing. Where did Daniel go that night? Who helped him? How did he return with so much when they had nothing? She wanted to ask him, but something in his eyes stopped her. There was peace in him, but also a depth that made her feel she did not yet know all of him. Daniel continued going out early every morning and returning late. Sometimes he brought food. Sometimes he brought nothing. But his face was no longer empty. There was a strange confidence in him now, like a man walking toward something he already understood. One afternoon, Amaka followed him. She felt guilty doing it, but her heart was restless. She waited until he disappeared past the tall palm trees at the edge of the village, then she followed at a distance. He did not go toward the farms. He did not go toward the market. He walked straight into the bush path that led far away from the village. Amaka's feet trembled, but she kept walking. After almost an hour of walking, she reached a small clearing. There was a parked vehicle, black, shining, expensive. Two men stood beside it, dressed in clean clothes that did not belong to village life. Amaka's heart skipped. She hid behind a tree. Daniel walked up to them. The men bowed. Her knees nearly failed her. She watched as Daniel spoke to them. They handed him a thick brown envelope. He opened it, checked something inside, nodded, and gave them instructions. One of the men wrote something down. They bowed again. Daniel then turned and walked back toward the village. The men entered the car and drove away. Amaka stood frozen. Her husband, the beggar, giving orders to men who bowed to him? Her head was spinning. She ran back toward the village before Daniel could see her. That night, she could not sleep. She stared at him lying beside her, wondering who he really was. The next morning, something happened that shook the whole village. A truck arrived. Big. White. New. It stopped near the hut. The driver came down and asked, "Is this the home of Daniel?" People gathered. Amaka stepped forward. Yes. The driver handed her documents and several bags of rice, beans, oil, clothes, and cartons of food. Then he drove away. The villagers were silent. Judith's mouth fell open. Who is sending this? Amaka whispered. Daniel returned from his walk and found the entire village standing in front of his hut. What is happening? He asked. Amaka looked at him, tears in her eyes. Who are you? Daniel was silent. The villagers watched. He took a deep breath. I will explain. But not here. That night, inside the hut, he spoke. My name is Daniel Okari. My father owns companies in the city. Years ago, my family rejected me because I refused to marry the woman they chose for me. I left everything behind and chose to live among the poor to understand life. Judith began to cry. I came here with nothing. I wanted to know who would love me without my money. Amaka's chest felt tight. I met you, he said. You gave me water when you had little. You shared your food when you were hungry. Your kindness saved my life. He took her hands. I never lied about my love. I only hid my wealth. Amaka could not speak. Outside, the village slept, unaware that everything was about to change. And this was only the beginning of the storm. That night, after Daniel finally told them the truth, silence filled the hut like thick smoke. Judith sat on the mat, her hands trembling. Amaka knelt in front of her husband, staring at his face like she was seeing him for the first time. You are rich. Judith whispered. Daniel nodded. Very rich, Mama. Amaka felt dizzy. All the suffering. All the hunger. All the mockery. You watched me carry firewood. You watched me cry when there was no food, and you had money? Amaka asked softly. Daniel's eyes became wet. I wanted a wife who would love me, not my money, he said. And I wanted to help you both in a way that would not destroy the lesson of life. Judith wiped her tears. God has strange ways. That night, none of them slept. By morning, the village began to whisper. Did you see the truck yesterday? Something is not normal about that man. Where did all that food come from? Daniel walked through the village like always, greeting everyone with respect. Some greeted back. Some stared. In the afternoon, the same black vehicle returned. This time, it did not stop near the hut. It drove straight to the village square. Two men came down. One carried documents. The other carried a loudspeaker. The village gathered. The elder came out. Men left their farms. Women left their cooking. The man with the loudspeaker spoke. Good people of Umuoma, we are here on behalf of Mr. Daniel Okari. Murmurs. That beggar, someone whispered. Yes, the man continued. Mr. Daniel Okery is the new owner of the land that surrounds this village, including the abandoned farmlands and the old cocoa estate. The crowd gasped. He is also building a health center, a school, and a water borehole for this community. Construction begins next week. People froze. And he requests that no one disturb his wife and her mother. Then Daniel stepped forward. The same Daniel who used to beg for water. Silence swallowed the village. The elder's voice shook. Daniel, is this true? Daniel bowed slightly. Yes, sir. Some women fell to their knees. Some men removed their caps. The same people who mocked him. The same people who laughed at Amaka. Now standing before a man with power. Daniel turned to Amaka and Judith. This village gave me life when I had nothing. Now I give back. Tears rolled down Amaka's face. That evening, the entire village stood at their hut. The same women who called Amaka cursed now called her blessed. The same men who laughed now bowed. Judith looked at them quietly. And in her heart, she knew. Kindness had won. But Daniel was not finished. The real reward was still coming. The sun had not fully risen when the sound of engines rolled into Omuoma. Not one. Not two. But 5 black vehicles, moving slowly, raising dust as they entered the village road like kings returning home. People stopped what they were doing. Women dropped their water pots. Children froze mid-play. Men stepped out of their huts. The entire village stood still. The cars stopped in front of Daniel and Amaka's hut. Doors opened. Men in suits stepped out. One of them walked straight to Daniel and bowed. Good morning, sir. The word sir echoed through the village. Daniel nodded calmly. Amaka's legs were weak. Judith sat down on a stool, holding her chest. The same Daniel that once begged for water. The same man mocked and laughed at. Now standing with powerful men bowing before him. The village elder rushed forward. My son, please, what is happening? Daniel turned to him. Papa, today I am making my promise real. He gestured to the men. They opened the trunks of the vehicles. Inside were documents, machines, building materials, large envelopes, boxes. The men began unloading everything at the village square. One man brought out a map of the village and spread it on the ground. This area, he said, pointing, will be the new health center. This area will be the primary school. This one is the water project. The crowd was silent. Daniel stepped forward. For years, you watched a poor girl and her mother suffer. You laughed. You mocked. You judged. Yet they never stopped being kind. He looked at Amaka. This woman fed me when she was hungry. She gave me water when she had none. Her mother welcomed me without knowing who I was. Some villagers lowered their heads. So today, Omuoma will change. Construction started that same morning. Men dug. Trucks moved. Machines roared. By evening, the foundation of the health center had been marked. And the village knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. By the time the first block of the health center was laid, Omuoma was no longer the same village. Every morning, trucks arrived. Every afternoon, men worked. Every evening, children gathered around the construction site, watching in wonder. The same land where Amaka once fetched firewood to survive was now becoming something the village had never seen. And yet, the greatest shock had not happened. One afternoon, as Amaka returned from the market, she saw a stranger standing outside their hut. He was old. His back bent. His walking stick shook in his hand. Judith came out of the hut and froze. Father. The man lifted his eyes. It was Amaka's grandfather. The man who chased Judith away many years ago. The man who said she brought shame. The man who rejected his own blood. He fell to his knees. Forgive me. Judith stood still. Amaka watched, her heart pounding. I was wrong, the old man cried. I let pride destroy my family. Judith's tears fell silently. She helped him stand. You broke me, she said. But God healed me. The old man looked at Amaka. My child. I am sorry. Amaka held his hand. We forgive you. That day, the village learned another lesson. The past can kneel before the future. When Amaka's grandfather collapsed on his knees in front of Judith, the entire village of Umuoma stood frozen. This was not an ordinary moment. This was the same old man who once chased a pregnant daughter out of his compound in front of elders. The same man who allowed shame to be louder than love. The same man who turned his back on his own blood. Now his walking stick lay on the dusty ground as he knelt like a child. The wind was quiet. The birds were silent. Even the children stopped playing. Judith's heart was beating so loudly she could hear it in her ears. For a moment she did not see the old man in front of her. She saw the frightened young girl she once was, standing in the rain with a swollen belly, begging her father not to send her away. The memory almost crushed her. The old man's voice broke the silence. "Judith, my daughter. I was proud. I was blind. I listened to the village and forgot my own heart." His shoulders shook. "I have carried this pain for years." Judith swallowed. Her chest felt tight. She had waited for this moment for more than 2 decades, not for revenge, not for anger, but for this truth to finally breathe. "Father," she said slowly, "when you sent me away, I had nothing. No home. No husband. No food. I slept in an abandoned hut. I labored on people's farms. I carried my child on my back and begged for work." Her voice was calm, but every word cut deep. "You broke me. But God rebuilt me." The old man bowed his head. Amaka stepped forward. She knelt beside him and gently lifted his hand. "Grandfather," she said softly, "my mother suffered, yes. But she raised me with love. We do not carry anger. We carry healing." The old man looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. "You are the child I was supposed to protect." That was when the village elder stepped forward, his voice trembling. "This is the power of goodness. This family suffered, but they did not become bitter." The villagers whispered among themselves. Many of them remembered their own words, the insults, the laughter, the mockery. Some women who once called Amaka cursed now wiped their eyes in shame. The old man stood slowly. "I want to return home with you, Judith." Judith looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "Yes. But not because you are my father. Because forgiveness is my peace." That night, the old man stayed in the hut with them. He ate their food. He slept on their mat. And for the first time in his life, he saw how poverty looked from inside. Over the next days, the village continued to change. The health center walls rose. The school foundation expanded. The borehole drilling began. But the greatest change was not in the buildings, it was in the people. Those who once avoided Amaka now greeted her with respect. Those who once whispered now spoke kindly. Those who once laughed now stood in awe. One evening, Daniel called a village meeting. Everyone gathered under the irako tree. He stood in front of them, no longer in torn clothes, but in simple clean attire that carried authority without pride. "I did not come here to punish anyone," he said. "I came here to build. But let this village learn, never judge a person's worth by their condition." The silence that followed was heavy. I was treated as nothing. But one girl gave me everything. He held Amaka's hand. "Kindness saved my life. Today it saves this village." The crowd slowly went down on their knees. Not in fear. In respect. That night, Judith whispered to Amaka, "My daughter, suffering is not the end. Sometimes it is the road to destiny." Amaka held her mother's hand. And in that moment, she finally understood. Everything she endured was preparing her for this future. But destiny was not finished yet. The city was calling. And the world was about to know their story. The morning Daniel told Amaka they were traveling to the city, she did not answer him for a long time. She was standing in front of their hut, watching the sunrise paint the village sky with soft gold, listening to the birds sing on the mango tree, breathing in the smell of firewood smoke and wet earth. This place had been her whole life. Every stone, every path, every face was a chapter of her story. The thought of leaving it made her heart feel heavy and light at the same time. "The city?" she finally asked. Daniel nodded. "There are things you need to see. People you need to meet. And a life waiting for you." Judith was sitting on a stool behind them, plaiting her gray-streaked hair. She paused and looked up. My daughter has never been outside this village. Daniel smiled gently. Then it is time. The whole village came out to watch when the black cars arrived again. 5 of them, shining in the sun, lined up like they belonged to another world. Amaka stood there in her simple wrapper, holding her small bag, her heart beating fast. Some children ran around the cars, touching them, laughing. Women whispered, men nodded in awe. When Amaka stepped into the car, her knees were shaking. As the vehicles moved, she looked back through the window. Judith stood waving, the village shrinking behind her, the old hut becoming smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the dust of the road. She whispered, goodbye. The journey was long. The road changed from narrow dusty paths to wide smooth highways. Amaka watched everything like a dream. Tall buildings rose from the ground like giants. Cars moved in lines, people walked fast, lights shone even in daylight. This is the city, Daniel said softly. Her mouth fell open. They arrived at a tall glass building. Guards opened the gate. The cars drove inside a beautiful compound filled with flowers, fountains, and clean white stones. At the center stood a mansion that looked like something from another world. Amaka's hands were shaking as she stepped out. This is our home, she asked. Daniel nodded. She could not speak. She could not breathe properly. She remembered the leaking roof of the hut, the cracked walls, the cold nights. Now she was standing in front of a palace. Inside the house, the floor shone like water. The ceiling was high. The furniture was soft. The smell was sweet and clean. A group of workers lined up. Welcome, madam, they said together. Amaka turned to Daniel. They called me, madam. He smiled. Because you are. Her life changed that day. New clothes. New bed. Warm bath. Hot food. Peace. Yet Amaka did not become proud. The first night in the mansion, she cried. Not from joy alone, but from the memory of every painful step that led her here. Over the next weeks, Daniel introduced her to a world she never knew. She met business partners, company workers, lawyers. People bowed to her. They respected her. They listened to her. But inside her heart, she remained the same girl who fetched water from the stream. One afternoon, Daniel took her to his office. The building was tall, shining, filled with glass and light. On the wall was a large sign. Okari Global Group. She looked at it and laughed softly. This is your name. Yes, he said. And now it is your name too. She sat in the big chair in his office, touching the table gently, feeling like she might wake up from a dream. Daniel, she whispered, why me? He knelt in front of her. Because when I had nothing, you gave me everything. Amaka closed her eyes. A tear fell. That evening, she called Judith. Mama, she said, I am in a palace. Judith laughed through tears. God has done it. But the greatest test of Amaka's heart was still coming. Because the same city that now honored her was the same world that once ignored her existence. And destiny was preparing her next lesson. Amaka did not sleep the night before they returned to Umuoma. She lay on the wide soft bed in the city mansion, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of machines and distant city sounds. The room was large, beautiful, peaceful, yet her mind was far away, walking barefoot on village sand, hearing the laughter of children, smelling the smoke from her mother's cooking fire. Tomorrow, she would return. Not as the poor girl from the abandoned hut. Not as the farmer's helper. Not as the girl who married a beggar. She would return as Mrs. Daniel Okari. The weight of that truth pressed on her chest. At dawn, she stood by the window, watching the city wake up. Daniel came behind her and wrapped his arms around her. You are thinking of them, he said. Yes, she replied. They watched me suffer. They watched me work. They laughed at me. Now I am afraid of how they will look at me. Daniel turned her around. Do not go there with pride. Go there with purpose. She nodded. By mid-morning, the convoy was on the road. 5 black cars. Security in front and behind. Boxes of gifts in the trunk. Medical equipment. School supplies. Clothes. Food. The road to Umuoma felt shorter than before, but Amaka's heart beat harder with every mile. When the first roofs of the village appeared, her breath caught. "Daniel," she whispered, "this is my home." The cars slowed. People began to gather. Children ran alongside the vehicles shouting, "They are coming! They are coming!" When the cars stopped at the village square, the entire village was waiting. The elder stepped forward. "Welcome." Amaka stepped out. Silence fell. They stared at her. Her clothes were simple but elegant. Her hair was neatly styled. Her posture was calm and strong. Her eyes carried both the village girl and the city woman. She walked slowly. Some women began to cry. Some men removed their caps. The same people who once mocked her now stood in awe. Amaka did not raise her voice. She did not insult them. She did not boast. She smiled. "Good afternoon." The villagers replied together, "Good afternoon, madam." She looked at the hut where she once lived, now replaced by a strong new building Daniel had quietly built for Judith. Her mother came out and ran into her arms. They held each other, crying. That day, Amaka addressed the village. "I did not return to shame anyone. I returned to thank you. This village shaped my life. My suffering here built my strength." She paused. "But let us teach our children something new. Never judge a person's future by their present." The village elder nodded slowly. They shared the gifts. Food was cooked. Music played. Laughter returned. But the most powerful moment came when Amaka walked to the old women who once laughed at her. She knelt. "My mothers, I greet you." They broke down in tears. That night, the village slept differently. Not in shame, but in hope. Because one of their own had risen, and did not forget them. And yet, one chapter remained. The final reward. The full circle. The destiny of kindness. The moon hung over Umuoma that night like a silent witness. The village that once slept in hunger now slept in hope. Music had stopped. Laughter had faded. People lay in their homes thinking of the same thing. The girl they once mocked had returned as their miracle. But Amaka did not sleep. She sat outside her mother's new house, wrapped in a soft shawl, staring at the stars. Daniel sat beside her. "You are quiet," he said. "I am remembering everything," she replied. "The hut. The hunger. The pain. The laughter of people when we had nothing. And now this." Daniel held her hand. "You deserve it." Amaka shook her head slowly. "I did not work for wealth. I worked for survival. What I deserve is the chance to give back." At sunrise, she gathered the village again. This time, not under the Irako tree, but inside the newly completed health center courtyard. The building stood proud, painted white, shining in the sun, with the words, "Gift of Kindness." The villagers stared in awe. Amaka stepped forward. "This is not Daniel's project alone," she said. "It is the reward of kindness. This village raised me in suffering, but it did not crush my heart." She turned and called out, "Mama Judith." Her mother stepped forward, her hands shaking. "This woman taught me when we had nothing to give thanks for everything. When I gave water to a stranger, it was because of her. When I shared food with a beggar, it was because of her." The villagers bowed their heads. Amaka continued. "And today, I announce the creation of the Amaka and Judith Foundation." Gasps filled the air. This foundation will sponsor the education of children who cannot afford school. It will support widows. It will provide food and training for young people. Tears rolled down many faces. She turned to the crowd. "Let the story of Umuoma teach the world. Kindness is not weakness, it is power." Daniel stepped forward and placed a crown on her head. Not gold. Not diamonds. But woven with simple white beads and palm leaves, a symbol of peace and purpose. "This is the crown of the village," the elder declared. "You are our daughter. Our queen." The villagers knelt. Not because she was rich, but because she was righteous. That evening, Amaka visited the stream where her story began. She carried water again, not because she had to, but because she remembered. She poured it on the ground and whispered, "Thank you, God." Years later, Umuoma became one of the most respected villages in the region. Children went to school. The sick received care. Young people learned skills. Widows were supported. And every time people asked how it started, the elders would say, "It started with a poor girl who gave a beggar water." Amaka never forgot where she came from. She never became proud. She never turned her back on pain. She built a bridge from suffering to hope, and walked others across it. Because in the end, wealth did not change her. Kindness revealed her. And the world finally learned what the village once failed to see. The girl they mocked was the blessing they did not recognize.